Okay.
One, it pays very, very well.
Okay.
um, Tech in general as an industry very rewarding if you are fortunate to work for a company that has some level of success. So that's a very important caveat because there's a lot of tech startups and a lot of,
Hmm.
I've also done that as well. Number two, as we all know, tech is more and more ingrained in our daily lives. So there's no way
Yes,
around
absolutely.
technology.
Hi, thank you so much for joining the Falling for Learning podcast. I am TD Blennaw. We have this podcast to help parents and caregivers with having the resources, strategies, and tools needed to make sure that their children are on track for learning and to stay on track for success. Today, we have Micah Jackson. He's going to talk to you about his career in tech and his educational path up to this point. Thank you so much for joining us, Micah.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Um, so one thing that we want the audience to consider is like, what is your current job title and your responsibilities?
Sure. So I'll tell you my title first, and then I'll explain it because it's a long title.
Okay.
So I work for Snap, and basically Snapchat, the app that many people know. I'm sure a lot of your listeners and their kids use Snapchat. And my title is Senior Manager for Platform Partnerships, and I oversee content strategy and innovation. And what
Okay.
that all means, I should have said AR content, which AR stands for augmented reality.
Okay.
And basically, what my job is to a lot of the augmented reality technology that's used on Snapchat for like the filters and things like that.
Okay.
Well, my job is to take that AR technology and figure out ways to apply it outside of Snapchat. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. So, how did you get here to this current career path? So, we want to ask you, like, who or what hooked you into learning as a child?
That's a great question. So I actually have two. I have a who and a what. I don't know if this happened before on your show. I'll start with the what. The what that really made me kind of pay attention as a student was I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. So I wanted to fly on the space shuttle and go to space and all that stuff. And somebody, I don't know if it was a teacher or my mom, but somebody told me like, hey, if you want to be an astronaut, you really need to study math and science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that point, it kind of clicked for me, and I really began to like pay attention, for like science and things like that. And I really liked science. Like science was probably my favorite subject as a kid. Um,
Okay.
in terms of the who, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of really great teachers. But there was one teacher that stood out in particular. His name was Mr. Cosby. He was my fifth grade teacher. And if you're thinking he
Sounds
was,
familiar.
yeah, exactly. He was related to Bill Cosby. He was his younger brother.
Okay.
Um, but Mr. Cosby was he truly made learning fun. He was a really unique teacher in that just his style and the way that he taught lessons, it was almost like watching a storyteller, and it was just one of those he's just one of those great teachers, that really just made learning interesting for me, as a
Okay.
kid. So
Cool. And so you have your who, you have your what, and then what was your education path that led you to your current career?
yeah, so I aside from being an astronaut, the thing that I always enjoyed doing as a kid was drawing. Like I loved art. My first grade teacher gave me a certificate for art. That was like the first award that I got.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I went to a private grade school for first to sixth grade here in Los Angeles. It unfortunately it no longer exists, but it was called International Children's School,
Okay.
or ICS for short. And it was unique in that it was largely taught by African American staff, run by African American staff. Most of the students were Black or Hispanic, but a lot of like celebrities at that time or even today attended there as well.
Okay. Who were some of your classmates?
Yeah. So back in the day, there was a show called Different Strokes, and
Okay. Yes.
the one of the main characters, his name was Emmanuel, or not Emmanuel, it was, now I forget, I'm like
Gary
blanking.
Coleman.
Gary Coleman, thank you. He attended there, and Alfonso Ribeiro, who used to be on Fresh Prince of Bel Air, he's still on TV.
Yes,
He
yes.
attended there, and then Tyra Banks before she was like who she is today.
Supermodel. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, she was there, and then Kenya Barris, who's like a writer, producer, but a lot of and then there were some other like actors, and then
Hmm.
also the children of like some actors and producers and things like
Right.
that were also attended. So it was a great school. It really prepared me, I think, for the career that I have in terms of just the foundational learning.
Yes.
And then junior high school, I went to Audubon here in Los Angeles, and basically it was my first public school experience, and it
Hmm.
really taught me how to adapt to a different environment,
Hmm.
go to school with kids who were from all different backgrounds, and then from there I went to Hamilton Music Academy here in Los Angeles. And I forgot to mention that. So at Audubon, I got interested, still not so much in art and drawing, but I got interested in drama,
Okay.
still different creative outlet. But that led me into Hamilton Music Academy, because you back then you had to basically audition to go to Hamilton.
Okay.
So even though it's a public school, it was still sort of closed. But I didn't play an instrument. I actually was a performer. So I did
Oh,
drama at Hamilton and was part of their play production. And I was in a bunch of plays, and that was sort of what I did at
nice.
Hamilton. Yeah.
Nice. And I did do a deep dive, and we do have a video of you at
Oh my
Hamilton. So we will
goodness.
include it so you can see.
Oh my
Yeah, because you
goodness.
were one of the first classes in that music academy. And so that's when you were,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to say it was like Dateline, but yeah, we'll put it on. So
Oh goodness, I don't know what you're gonna see, but yeah, it should be interesting. But it was good times at Hamilton. I really enjoyed, and too, like, even aside from drama, like Hamilton at that time, I give it credit for being one of the most integrated schools, like in LAUSD.
okay.
So it did, if anything prepared me for my career, I have to say it was being at Hamilton and being like a student among kids from all different backgrounds, ethnicities, socioeconomical backgrounds. Like it really
Hmm.
prepared me to be comfortable, no matter where someone came from. So from Hamilton, I wanted to go to UCLA, but the major that I applied to at UCLA, which is the design major, um,
Okay.
well, that school closed my senior year, so they weren't accepting any new applicants for that particular major. And so basically, long story short, they sent me this letter saying, hey, you can either choose a different major or apply as like undeclared. And
Hmm.
so I can't remember. I think I did apply for. I think I applied to be a theater major or something like that, but I didn't get
Hmm.
accepted to that
Okay.
particular major. So I basically was like, either I can try to go to a different school, or my mom was like, you should just go to West LA, go to the community college, and then transfer. And it wouldn't have been my first choice, but I have to
Hmm.
say it ultimately was the best choice, because the first 2 years at West LA, the thing I realized was that I wasn't really ready for UCLA. Like if I had gone to UCLA right out of high school, I
Hmm.
could have potentially had to drop out because I was
Wow.
not prepared, you know. But the other thing too is it saved a ton of money, you know, because I was able to knock out my first 2 years and, you know, have no debt going into UCLA. And so, you know, I tell people like if money is a barrier to going to college, definitely go to community college because it's a way of not only saving money but also understanding like where you really are, you know, in terms of your preparation and being able to, you know, really hack it when you get to, you know, especially at school. UCLA is no joke, you know. It is
Yeah.
and even back then it was hard. It was very hard even when I transferred. But you know, had I not had that discipline at West LA, I don't know if I would have made it, you know.
I just want to pause with there because a lot of kids, they'll get really hung up on that setback, not getting into the school of their choice or not being able to do that. And you took the time to, not that you wanted to, but you went to the community college and then you can reflect on how much you gained from that experience. So it's something that we may need to consider for kids. It's not
Absolutely.
the end of the world and, take some time and then get into the program eventually that you wanted to get into. So it's a good
Yeah.
lesson.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I think too it's like it, it can be, yeah, I know, I understand that you know, when a lot of students don't get their sort of a school or the school that they really want to go to, like, you know, I'm a big believer in that, you know, everything kind of happens for a reason, right? And like
Yes.
you in many cases, this is also relevant to UCLA and going back to the design major, because what ended up happening, so I went to West LA for a couple of years and wanted to transfer, you know, once I had all my classes and coursework ready. Well, UCLA, the design program still wasn't open.
Right.
So when I applied to UCLA, I had to apply as an art history major, which thankfully I was accepted and I got into UCLA as an art
Right.
history major. But it wasn't until that first, like basically the first quarter at UCLA, that they were finally starting to accept applications for design. And so, long story short, I applied to the design program and thankfully I got admitted. And I'm literally of the first class to graduate from UCLA's new revamped design program. And
Wow.
so it, you know, the timing all worked out, thankfully. And had I, you know, if I had chosen to go to a different college or something, like if I had gone to a Cal State or like a, you know, just another school, um, I probably wouldn't have transferred. I probably would have just stayed and gotten a degree, but I wouldn't have gotten, you know, the degree that I wanted initially,
Right.
you know. So yeah, I mean, you have to, you know, life is funny like that. You have to sometimes just kind of roll with, you know, however the path leads
Yeah.
you, basically.
So, as you're talking about, your art and then your drama, like what are some of the activities and courses that you took
Mhm.
that really helped you, propel you to success that you have today?
Sure. So I would say along the way, I'll kind of go through each phase of schooling. So in grade school, it was sort of the nurturing of the art, you know, and I think too, like I said, studying science and math and really
Hmm.
kind of paying more attention to those subjects. Um, and I would say too, the thing I credit with my oh, this is a big one, really relevant for grade school. We had it was, again, it was a private school, so that
Hmm.
was kind of the exception. But it was, I had a computer class in second grade, and
Oh,
this was in
okay.
1982. So that was
Mm.
almost unheard of. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was unheard of, you know, in any kind of public school or anything like that. That and I had my own first computer at home when I was 9 years old. And so that played a key factor directly into what I'm doing today.
Right.
So I would say that's the first thing, is that one, just the exposure to a computer and understanding like how it worked, and like that you needed to, and back then you had to write, you literally had to use a language called BASIC in order to do anything in a computer.
Yes.
So you had to code, right? So it was like there was no way around it. There was
It's
no
a
other.
black screen, right?
It's just a, yeah, it was a, oh, back then I would hook it up to my TV. Like that's how, yeah, you had to, I had a Commodore, and then at school we had an Apple two, we had an Apple one, I think, or one or two C. So it had like the old green screen and the old
Yeah.
green text and all of that stuff. But yeah, you had to write code in order to do anything. And so that was the first step. Junior high school, I think there the drama was something. I was always a very shy kid, and even in grade school, and so
Mm-hmm.
the drama was what it was, an outlet to help me be able to express myself and not feel more open and being able to
Okay.
talk to people. That's the second most critical skill that is needed for my current role, like, and it's the one I use the most, quite frankly. And then
Yeah.
that just continued to develop at Hamilton when I in play production. And then I'd say at Hamilton, the thing that outside of I give credit to, I had a really great English teacher named Mr. Lee, and like he also was a person that really instilled in me not just English in terms of grammatical, being able to be astute as a good writer, but I think the thing that he taught me was like critical thinking and being able to really think about, there was no taboo subject like with him. Like in fact, he was the one that started me on journaling, right? And being able to write down ideas and things like that. So those are kind of the key pillars, I think, in my education, that before I get to college, that really helped me. And then
Yeah.
college, design, I wanted to be an architect. By the time I got to college, my
Right.
career shifted to architecture. Design was really sort of like the feeder underground, not undergrad
Yes.
degree that led into architecture. In fact, the school was the School of the Arts and Architecture at UCLA, and
Okay.
design was a major within that school, basically. Um, and so that's why I wanted to be in that major. But what happened during that time is there was the rise of like computer generated animation, and so like Pixar and Disney now
Yes.
uses
Yes.
CG animation. Long story short, what happened in college was I got more fascinated with that and like computer animation than architecture. And I actually had to take architecture classes as part of my coursework. And I
Okay.
found it to be a little boring, if I'm honest. It was just, it was like, I don't know if I want to do this actually, like, long term. It was still interesting, and I still love architecture actually, but the computer animated side, and basically using computer graphics to either represent the real world or
Mm-hmm.
like people in the case of
Join us for Well Educated Wednesdays every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. It is a free parent question and answer session where parents can ask questions, learn about resources, strategies, and tips to make sure their children are on track for learning and stay on track for success. That's every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. We look forward to seeing you and helping the next generation thrive.
Pixar animation. That was the thing that fascinated me. That was the thing that I would work on, until 2 a.m. because I just love creating things in a computer and like bringing them to life in a computer. And so, like, that was really the thing that got me to where I am at the moment.
Wonderful. And that's, we're called falling for learning. And it sounds like you're falling in love with what you were doing, when you can stay up all the time and, you just want to keep pursuing it. Um, so So tell us why this type of career is something worth pursuing. So if people are thinking about it or they're not sure, like why is it worth pursuing?
I'm going to try to, I'll give you the concise points and then I'll expound a little bit.
Okay.
One, it pays very, very well.
Okay.
um, Tech in general as an industry very rewarding if you are fortunate to work for a company that has some level of success. So that's a very important caveat because there's a lot of tech startups and a lot of,
Hmm.
I've also done that as well. Number two, um, as we all know, tech is more and more ingrained in our daily lives. So there's no way
Yes,
around
absolutely.
technology, basically. Like we're using technology right now,
Yes.
right? And so basically, if you want a job function in the future economy, there's no way that tech is not going to intersect with it. Basically,
Hmm.
there's no way
Yeah.
around it. So those are the two main pillars, right, for anyone thinking about a career in tech. And then
So,
also, I'll go
oh,
ahead,
sorry.
sorry.
So, can you give us like a salary range, maybe?
So the range is complete. They will vary. I will say for established tech companies or startups that are
Hmm.
doing relatively well, six-figure salaries are the minimum. And
Okay.
I would say, like, 100K is like entry level,
Okay.
basically, in that industry. And then I would say, obviously at the top end, you're looking at, there are people that make millions of dollars, obviously in tech. Like there's
Right.
without, people in the executive level, C-suite and that kind of thing. But I would say that the thing that many people don't realize is that people who are working in middle management and they're engineers that make $500,000 like in this industry, and it's not uncommon.
Okay.
Like that's not a uncommon thing. I would say multiple six figures is probably an average for a successful, or
Okay.
relatively successful tech company.
So, one thing I want to go back to because in your education, you told us UCLA, you told us undergrad. Did you do graduate school?
I did not. And in fact, I wanted to. My plan was to go, like I mentioned, I wanted to go to architecture, which would have been the graduate program for my major. But what happened is I ended up working out of college. So I worked at an
Okay.
ad agency initially, and then doing design. So I graduated in design, and I did like graphic design. That was also, I graduated in the late 90s. So this was also during the time of what was called the dot-com boom. So it was
Mm-hmm.
right, it was the
Okay.
emergence of like Google and Yahoo and AOL, and this was even before MySpace, but like ultimately led to like are not or like Facebook and like all of
Right.
these things. So like when I graduated, there was a lot of opportunity to work in the dot com, you know, basically
Hmm.
in the tech industry, but
Right.
back then the focus wasn't mobile, it was all web, it was all online. So I got a job and I worked for an ad agency first, worked for a digital, it was a precursor to iTunes,
Okay.
basically. Um, and then later, I have a crazy career.
Okay.
um, Worked for AOL, which would back then was like the Google of its time. Worked for
Right.
a video game company, Atari, which was like the original like game
Yes.
company. But this
Ooh.
was after all of that, and
Yes.
then worked for Yahoo, worked for Disney. There's an arcade cabinet from the Wreck-It Ralph movie behind me.
Yes. Let's talk
uh,
about that later. Your
yeah.
arcade. Yeah. Your
uh, I ended up, I did get to work for NASA doing web production, worked for JPL in Pasadena, and then
Hmm.
ultimately did my own startup, my own company, and then worked where I currently am at Snap. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, I mean the career path is all the stuff that I learned has taken me through this, incredible career path.
Yeah. All right. So that's something we need to note. Like, in this case, you don't like, is it the same now that you don't need to go to graduate school? Because I know that some careers you have to go to graduate school. You have to do your undergrad, you have to do this, but is that the same now?
So again, it depends on your area of focus.
Okay.
So in the case of tech, like you do not need a graduate degree to be an engineer.
Okay.
However, comma,
Okay.
um, it depends on, so, and this, it can get very complicated, but in the case of, emerging areas like AI or artificial intelligence, for example, there are people who are leading a lot of the key sort of industries in that space. More than likely they do have a graduate degree, and most likely from Stanford or MIT or something like that,
Okay.
because the reason is not about the name of the college, it's because those schools have funding from institutions
Okay.
and VCs and investors who want to cultivate that particular industry. And so they donate a lot of money to those programs. And thus you have majors that are sort of funded almost, for that specific research. And so those are the
So that
exceptions.
so that also means that you don't really need to spend the money. Like you don't have to like go into debt to do that program. Is that what that means?
Mm, you still have to pay to be a student at
Okay.
Stanford, right?
Okay.
But it means that more than often what happens, and Stanford is basically well known as like the Silicon Valley school, right? Like
Okay.
it's because they have this relationship with a lot of the venture capital firms and investors and to companies like Google and Yahoo and Microsoft, et cetera, where those companies will set aside funding for students who may be wanting to do research in the field of AI, right? So the student is still paying to
Okay.
go to that. They still are paying for their master's degree, and maybe
Okay.
I don't know the details. Some of them might be getting grants so that it's offset or whatever, but really the money is used to purchase, like for example, to study AI, you need racks and racks of computer servers, right?
Okay.
Those cost millions of dollars, right? And so the school doesn't have that kind of money necessarily, but a Google will come in and say, hey, well, we'll fund, we'll put $2 million in a fund or whatever for this research. Now I know I'm going off topic, but yeah, so
No, this is great
yeah,
information. Like we need to know about like where's the best schools to go to or places that
yeah.
fund it.
But
And
to answer
when
your question, you do not need a graduate
okay.
degree to be in tech. The
Okay.
answer is no, it's not required. But if you do want to study something like a very specific field, there's a good chance it will help you, because then you can thus
Okay.
have access to all of these things. So
And like what are some of the other hiring trends that are going on in tech right now that people should know about?
So the first thing I would say in general, kind of going back to you not needing a graduate degree or a postgraduate degree, um, excuse me, is that, and specifically too, I try to get this out to people of color who may not consider a career in tech because they're like, oh, I'm not a coder, right? Or I'm not
Right.
someone who knows how to program, a site or whatever. Tech utilizes all sorts of disciplines, whether it's art, whether it is project management, whether it's human resources, whether it's, even catering. I'm grateful at Snap, we have our own cafe and cafeteria,
Nice.
right? So there's a range of jobs and disciplines that are needed. In fact, like behavioral discipline is also needed, like being a counselor, being able to understand the dynamics of teams, like people who
Mm.
study that sort of discipline. And like So the thing I would just say is, like, in the tech sector, there's so many opportunities that a lot of people don't even realize are there,
Hmm.
because I think there's this misconception that, oh, I need to have a CS or a computer science degree in order to, work for Google or
Right.
Microsoft or whatever. You don't. You actually they take people of all sorts of disciplines. And so, to answer your question about hiring, it's been, obviously in the last few years, there's been a real shift about DEI and hiring a diverse
Right.
workforce. Well, that's not just a buzzword, and it doesn't just mean hiring people of color or people of, a specific background, or, sexual orientation, or any of that. What
Hmm.
what tech realize the industry realizes is that hiring people of all sorts of disciplines also is really beneficial, because you get insights and experience from people who, maybe their degree is in education, right? And they've learned how to write curriculums and how to
Yes.
structure things in a way that is applicable for training in our company, right? Like, we all
Right.
still have, like, every year I have to do the training for, like, all of the legal and the privacy and all that
Yes.
stuff. Well, it takes people who understand how to write a curriculum to do that, you know? Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So, and two, like, there's actually one of my coworkers, we for the tools that we use to create, augmented reality experiences. It's available for free on the web. Anybody can download it. You can be a student and download. It's called Lens Studio. I'm not trying to, like, plug it, but, like, if you're interested in AR, you can start, like, even in grade school. And but again, we hired someone with an education background to make the curriculum, because it makes sense, right? She knows how to take
Yes.
information and, make it and package it in a way that people can digest, so, like, yeah, there's all sorts of disciplines that are needed in tech.
Okay. I mean, thank you. That's like really good. What advice do you have for people who want to go in or maybe considering it, a tech career?
I would say, kind of the things I was just sharing, like, find whatever your passion is, whatever your interest is. And if you are, I would say, don't discount a company that, is a tech company, or maybe see. So I'll talk specifically about augmented reality, kind of using that example, right? Like, augmented reality is basically taking computer graphics and overlaying it on the real world, right? So something like that may seem like, you may seem like, oh, well, I don't know, that seems beyond me, or that's not my thing, or whatever.
Right.
Um, but the advice I would give you is that, look into what the company is that is doing that, and see where you fit in, right? And, like I was saying earlier, the way that our world is today, and definitely in the next 5-10 years,
Mm-hmm.
tech is going to be tech is will be ingrained in every aspect of
Yes.
any career. There's no way around it, right? So, being able to figure out how you fit in now is important, right? What skills can you bring to the table? So,
Yeah. Okay. So I think we need to address the big arcade or like the video game. I don't know what to call it in the back of the room. Tell us like more about what it is and all that.
So, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work for Disney for many years. And at Disney, I worked as a game producer. So
Okay.
I made games for when I was sharing about the dot com. So this was before, like, iPads and iPhones, like, not before that, but before kids had their own iPad and, like,
Okay.
iPhones. So back when they were, like, first coming out, like, kids didn't have that. But kids would use the computer and they would play games online.
Mm-hmm.
So I made games for the Disney.com website, and when this film came out, Wreck It Ralph, my job was to actually think of games like for
Okay.
these movies because they would use those games to promote the movie. And so I
Nice.
got to actually work with the producers and the directors and the writers. Like, so I got to know a lot of the Pixar folks, a lot of the
Mhm.
Disney. In fact, the producer and director sent this to me as a gift because they
Oh.
made. So we made 60 of these for the launch of the film, and they needed one for Comic Con in July in San
Okay.
Diego. And if you haven't seen the movie, the whole movie is like Ralph is a video game character, and like you're going inside the video game.
Mhm.
So this was actually the game that Ralph lived in. So they wanted to make a real one
Yeah.
for Comic Con, and then also for Disneyland and Disney World. So like Disneyland used to have an arcade. So they made 60 of these, and they actually were in Disneyland and El Capitan Theater here in Hollywood and a bunch of other theaters and
Mhm.
stuff. And then they had this big like marketing campaign where they had like these video game legends. Like these were people who had like all the highest scores, like the Guinness Book of World Records highest score for like Donkey Kong and all these other.
Oh, okay.
So they had this big tournament and they played this actual game and had like the high scores and all this stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, so the producers and the directors sent this to me as a gift because like I was a producer for this
Mhm.
particular game. So
Wow. Such an illustrious career. So many things. That's amazing.
I have a ton of stuff. Yeah, like I have quite the career, and like it have to be a whole other show if I were to tell you about all those experiences. But
All right.
yeah.
Well, for the future, yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving this insight. Are there any last things that you want to say to any parents who are trying to get their kids on track for learning and to stay on track for success?
Actually, there's a lot I could share, but I would say if there's one thing I could say, it is if one, invest in a computer if you don't have one or you don't have, access to
Okay.
one, get your kids access to a computer. Two, when you have access to a computer, learn, do not be afraid of coding. Learn coding, learn. AI is the talk of the town right now. That's going to make things a lot easier in the future. But right now, there are people making a lot of money learning how to basically cultivate AI right now.
Okay.
And I would say if there's any field that, is going to be one of expertise that's needed in the future, it's that. So learn to, don't buy the Jordans, save up, get a computer, get a Chromebook or something, right?
Okay.
Two, learn to code.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
And we will
having me.
put links in the summary about some of the things that Micah is talking to us about. Thank you again. Have a good week.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks again for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. New episodes go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. You can watch us on youtube.com at Falling for Learning or listen on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, Audible, Spotify, and much more. For more resources, visit fallinginlovewithlearning.com. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful week.